The night before my law school graduation, I got a message from my dad. Just one line. "We're too busy to make it. Good luck." That was it. No, "We're proud of you." No, "Sorry, we couldn't come." Not even a phone call. Just that flat, cold text, like he was canceling a dentist appointment. I stared at the screen for a second. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart thudding like I'd just been punched in the stomach. I thought maybe I read it wrong. But no. That's really what he said. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even reply. I smiled. Then I opened my laptop, found the link to the video, and hit send. It was a video of me standing on stage, in a deep blue graduation robe, giving the valedictorian speech. Not just graduating, but graduating top of my class. After 3 grueling years. After hundreds of hours spent studying while working part-time jobs. After fighting through moments where I thought I wouldn't make it. They didn't come. They had no idea. And I had stopped begging. See, people talk a lot about cutting off toxic people. They imagine some dramatic scene, a shouting match, slammed doors, blocked numbers. But that's not how it happened with me. My story is quieter, more subtle, almost invisible. But sometimes it's the smallest actions that reveal the deepest betrayals. That one text, "We're too busy to make it," wasn't just about graduation. It was every birthday they forgot, every award they brushed off, every time I said, "Look what I did," and they said, "That's nice," before turning back to my brother and asking him how he was doing. My name is Ayla Monroe. I'm 28 years old, and I was raised to believe that no matter how hard I worked, I would never be enough for my family. So, when I got that message from my dad, I didn't fall apart. I didn't beg them to change their minds. I didn't ask why Noah's new job orientation was more important than their daughter becoming a valedictorian. Instead, I gave them what they deserved. Silence, and a front row seat to what they missed. I clicked send on that email, then turned my phone off. Not on silent. Office. The next morning, as I walked onto that stage to deliver my speech, I wasn't thinking about the people who didn't come. I was thinking about the ones who did. My best friend Natalie, who stayed up helping me edit my final paper. Professor Chen, who told me I belonged in every room I walked into. And Uncle Ray, who once gave me a worn-out book on constitutional law and said, "They'll never see you, so you better see yourself." He died before I got into law school, but I carried that book in my bag every day. That morning, when I looked out over the crowd, I imagined him in the audience. And not my parents. Because when I gave that speech, I wasn't speaking to them. I was speaking to every person who's ever been overlooked. To the daughters who were told to stay quiet while their brothers got all the praise. To the kids who earned medals and heard only silence. To the students who bought their own cap and gown because no one else would. I told them what I needed to hear years ago. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone who's decided not to see it. And when I walked off that stage, diploma in hand, I felt something I'd never felt before. Not pride, not joy, power. The power of no longer chasing love from people who use it as a weapon. The power of walking away with nothing but your head high, and the power of saying, without a word, "You missed it, and I won't waste one more second trying to make you care." So, yeah, my dad said they were too busy to come to my graduation. And I smiled, and I emailed him a video of me giving the speech. Not to hurt him, not to shame him, but to let him know. I did it without him, and I'm just getting started. I was born in a small town in Kansas, flat land, silent streets, and families who knew too much about each other. We weren't poor, but everything in our house had a cost. Every favor, every smile, every moment of peace. From the outside, we looked like the ideal American family. My dad, Ethan Monroe, was a mechanical engineer. The kind of man who fixed things in the house, but broke people without even raising his voice. He believed in structure, in systems, in sons. My mom, Deborah, was quiet, anxious, always keeping the peace. You know the type, smiles during church, clutches her purse tightly, talks more to her roses than to her children. She never yelled, but she never defended me either. And then there was Noah, my older brother by 2 years. Blonde, easygoing, average grades, average dreams, and my dad's favorite from the day he was born. He could forget chores, skip class, bomb tests, and Dad would still clap him on the back like he'd just won a medal. Me, I was the opposite. Not just a girl, a smart girl, quiet, bookish, hungry, for attention, for approval, for space to breathe. I was the kind of kid who did her homework before dinner and memorized spelling words for fun. I won regional science fairs, essay contests, math competitions, and my father never came to a single one. At first, I thought it was just because he was busy. Then I thought maybe if I did more, he'd notice. But eventually, I stopped making excuses, because the truth was simpler and crueler. I wasn't his son. And in our house, daughters were expected to stay grateful, stay quiet, and not outshine the boy. It sounds dramatic. It sounds like something you'd see in a bad movie. But if you've lived it, you know, it's not always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. Death by 1,000 dismissals. Every time I brought home a certificate or a medal, my dad would look over his glasses and say, "That's nice, but let's not make a big deal out of it." And then the next week, he'd take Noah out for steak after he passed a driving test on the 3rd try. The first time I asked why they treated us so differently, my mom's voice cracked as she whispered, "You know your father doesn't like being challenged." I was 15. That's the moment I stopped asking questions. Instead, I buried myself in school. I applied to every honors program I could find. My goal wasn't just to escape. It was to build a new world entirely. One where I got to be someone without asking permission. I graduated high school a year early and left for college at 17. No one cried when I left. There were no hugs at the airport. No, "we'll miss you." Just a stiff pat on the shoulder from my dad and a to-go container from my mom with chicken salad I didn't eat. The day I stepped onto my college campus in Boston, it felt like entering a new dimension. I breathed easier, walked differently, smiled more. I was hundreds of miles away from that house, but I didn't realize until much later. I was still living like I was in it. Every grade I chased, every internship I applied for, every sleepless night in the library, it all came from that same little voice in my head saying, "Maybe now they'll see you. Maybe now Dad will call. Maybe now Mom will say she's proud." But they didn't. Even when I got into law school, on a full ride, mind you, they sent a generic "well done" card and didn't pick up when I called. Still, I kept going. Because when you grow up invisible, success doesn't feel like a celebration. It feels like survival. It was during law school that I really began to understand how deep the conditioning ran. I saw classmates who called their parents for advice, who had families fly in for networking events and job fairs. I watched moms and dads beam with pride in the audience at every panel, and I started wondering, not just why mine weren't like that, but why I still cared so much that they weren't. At first, I thought it was because I missed them, but the truth is, I missed the version of them I had created in my head. The ones who clapped when their daughter spoke. The ones who knew the difference between control and love. And eventually, I stopped pretending that version existed. By the time graduation rolled around, I had one goal: to stop performing. No more proving. No more waiting. No more hoping for applause from people who never clapped. I was done pretending they were ever going to show up, and I was ready to show up for myself. I used to think that dysfunction meant yelling. Plates thrown, doors slammed, chaos. But that wasn't my house. Our dysfunction was quiet, chilly, controlled, like a museum where nothing was supposed to be touched, including emotions. Everything in our home had a routine. Every Sunday dinner looked the same: roast beef, mashed potatoes, the news on in the background. My dad, Ethan, at the head of the table, talking about work or politics, and everyone else nodding like they agreed. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't ask difficult questions. You didn't cry. If you did, it was either overreacting or being difficult. And somehow, I was always the one being difficult. I started noticing the favoritism around age 7. That year, I got first place in the regional spelling bee. I remember walking up to my dad afterward, clutching the shiny gold medal around my neck. I stood in front of him, smiling like I was made of sunlight. He looked down at me and said, "That's nice. Did you thank the judges?" I did. I had, but that wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was for him to see me, just for a second. 5 days later, Noah hit a single in Little League, and Dad took him out for ice cream and posted about it on Facebook like he'd won a championship. That was the first time I realized. There were rules in our house, and I hadn't been given the playbook. Noah could interrupt conversations. I'd get scolded for talking back. Noah could sleep in and miss church. I'd be lectured about disrespect. Noah could dream of being a video game designer, and Dad would say, "He's just creative." I said I wanted to be a lawyer, and he rolled his eyes. "Why would you want to argue for a living?" He didn't say I wasn't smart enough. He didn't have to. He just made me feel like I was too much, too ambitious, too sensitive, too outspoken. I began shrinking myself to fit the version of me they preferred. Polite, agreeable, invisible. And when I couldn't shrink anymore, I simply escaped into my work. It was the one place I could excel without apology. Meanwhile, my mother floated in the background like wallpaper. She was never cruel, but she was never really there either. If I told her Dad made me feel small, she'd sigh and say, "He doesn't mean it like that. He just wants the best for you." Or worse, try not to take it personally. But how do you not take it personally when your own family treats your achievements like annoyances? The truth was, our family ran on a kind of unspoken economy. Love was given based on how well you obeyed. And I didn't obey. I questioned. I challenged. I had opinions about politics, about gender roles, about college, about life. And because of that, I became the problem. Even Noah, who I loved truly, started treating me like I was difficult for existing. He once said to me, after I got into an honors program in undergrad, "You know, it wouldn't kill you to be more chill. Dad would like you better." I laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was a survival strategy, coming straight from someone who had learned the rules early and played them well. And I don't blame him for that. I blame the system that told us we had to compete for affection, that there was only room for one child to matter. I used to wonder what was wrong with me. Now I realize I was raised in an environment where love was conditional, and my conditions were never met. When I left home, I thought I was free. But the truth is, I brought that hunger with me. It followed me into college, into law school, into every friendship and relationship. I was always waiting for someone to say, "You did it, Ayla. You're enough." But no amount of degrees or titles can fill the space where unconditional love should have been. It took me years to name what I lived through. Not abuse, not neglect. Something murkier. Emotional starvation. And the people around us never saw it. Because from the outside, we looked fine, polite, functional. But being invisible in plain sight doesn't make it hurt less. In fact, it makes it harder. Because when no one sees the wound, no one offers a bandage. And for years, I didn't even know I was bleeding. Graduation was supposed to be the finish line. 3 years of law school, hundreds of late nights, one too many panic attacks in the library bathroom, and finally the email, "Congratulations. You've been selected to deliver the valedictorian speech at commencement." I reread it 3 times. I wasn't just graduating. I was graduating first in my class, from one of the top law schools in the country. And I was proud. Not in a flashy way. Not for the attention. Proud because I had done it alone. Without backup. Without safety nets. Without a single check from my parents. But even with all that independence, some part of me, a piece of the little girl who used to hold up spelling bee medals, still wanted to share this moment with the people who raised me. So, I did what I thought was mature. I emailed my parents the details, ceremony time, location, seating information. I even included a line about how honored I was to give the speech, how meaningful it would be if they could come. And then, I waited. 3 days passed. Nothing. A week. Nothing. Finally, the night before graduation, I got a text from my dad. Just one line. "We're too busy to make it. Good luck." I sat in my apartment holding my phone like it was burning a hole in my hand. That was it. No, "We're proud of you." No, "Sorry." Not even a call. just a flat sentence that landed like a slap. I waited to feel something. Anger, hurt, anything. Instead, I felt something different. Certainty. Because in that moment I realized they had no intention of ever showing up, not just to this event, but to me. This wasn't a scheduling conflict. This was a pattern. They weren't too busy. They just didn't care enough. I found out later that they had driven 2 states away the same week to help Noah move into a new apartment for his job. He wasn't getting promoted. He wasn't graduating. He wasn't even doing anything special. He was existing, and that alone was enough for them to show up. Meanwhile, their daughter, the one who never gave them trouble, the one who worked multiple jobs to stay afloat, the one who studied until her eyes blurred, wasn't worth the drive. It felt like someone had thrown open every locked door in my mind. Suddenly, I saw it all clearly. Every missed birthday, every awkward phone call, every time I downplayed my achievements to avoid sounding difficult. I had been performing for people who refused to clap. Even after all this time, law school, therapy, new city, new life, I had still held out hope that this moment would be different. But it wasn't. And that was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in an angry, explosive way. More like a cord that had finally worn too thin and broke. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't try to make them feel guilty. Instead, I did something they never expected. I smiled. Then I opened my laptop, attached the video file I'd already had edited and ready, me on stage, giving the speech of my life, and I wrote a short message, for when you're not too busy. Then I hit send, and I turned my phone off, entirely, for the first time in years. It was the cleanest break I'd ever made. There was no confrontation, no argument, no final plea. Just a silent declaration. You don't get to miss my life and still claim a seat in it. Because this wasn't just about graduation. It wasn't about a ceremony or a speech. It was about a lifetime of being treated like an afterthought, like a backup plan, like a ghost in their family photo. And that one text, their casual dismissal, was the final proof I needed. They didn't forget me. They chose not to see me. And now, I was choosing not to let that define me. The next morning, I woke up lighter. Not happy, not healed, but clear. I had finally stopped asking to be chosen, and that was the beginning of everything changing. After I sent the video, I turned off my phone, closed my laptop, and just sat there, alone in my apartment, in the dark. The silence was loud. I thought I'd feel proud, empowered, vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. That kind of ache that doesn't make noise. It just settles in your chest like wet cement. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall, trying to remember the last time my dad said he loved me. Not good job, not we're proud, but a real heartfelt I love you. I couldn't remember. And when I tried to picture my mom's face when I was a kid, when I was hurt or scared, I couldn't remember that either. Only her looking away. Only her brushing my hair and saying, "Just don't let it get to you, sweetheart." But what happens when the thing you're not supposed to let get to you is your entire childhood? That night, I cried. Not because they weren't coming, but because I finally stopped pretending it still surprised me. I cried for the teenage version of me, the one who used to write fake, proud parent letters to herself in her journal, just to feel what it might be like. I cried for the little girl who clutched that spelling bee medal, thinking maybe this would be the thing that changed everything. And I cried because I had worked so hard to become someone worth showing up for, only to realize I had been enough all along, but they weren't capable of seeing it. That was the grief. That was the heartbreak. Not their absence, but the truth behind it. They could have shown up. They chose not to. And I had spent almost 3 decades trying to earn something that was never mine to carry in the first place. That realization cracked me open. For the first time, I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at myself for holding on so tightly to the fantasy that one day they'd wake up and love me the way I needed. I had waited so long for that moment, their change, their apology, their arms wide open at the airport gate. But I had been loving them like a daughter while they were treating me like an obligation. And now the performance was over. I sat there until the sun started to rise, my eyes puffy, throat sore, surrounded by graduation robes and note cards, and a bouquet of flowers I bought for myself. A part of me wondered, will they even watch the video? Will they see me on that stage in front of hundreds, speaking with fire in my chest, and feel anything at all? And worse, what if they don't? That thought almost broke me. Because if they could see that moment and still feel nothing, then I had to accept something even scarier. They were never going to be the parents I needed. Not in the past, not now, not ever. That realization isn't clean. It's not a one-time epiphany. It's a slow bleed. You feel it when you scroll past a video of a dad hugging his daughter at graduation. You feel it when someone says, "My mom would never miss something like that." You feel it when you automatically reach for your phone to share good news, and then remember they wouldn't care. Grief, when you're grieving people who are still alive, is a strange kind of pain. You can't bury it. You can't move on. It just lives with you, like an echo you learn to ignore. But that night, I didn't ignore it. I let it hurt. I let it crack me open. Because that's the only way I could finally let the fantasy die and make space for something real. Not their version of love, my version of peace. Something shifted in me after that night. Not like a movie moment where everything clicks into place and you wake up renewed. It was slower than that, quieter, like a tide changing direction. Not with thunder, but with pull. In the days following my graduation, while everyone else was taking pictures with their families, I kept to myself. I walked around campus like a ghost, robes folded in a bag, diploma in hand, smile packed away. But underneath the quiet, something inside me had started unraveling. All my life, I'd clung to the belief that if I worked hard enough, if I achieved enough, if I played the part perfectly enough, they would finally see me. They would love me in the way I needed. But that belief had always come with an unspoken lie. That it was my fault they didn't love me right. That I was too opinionated, too emotional, too driven. But in that silence, in that space where the last illusion had collapsed, I started asking myself new questions. What if I was never the problem? What if I've always been worthy, but I was just born into a family that didn't know how to see it? That thought hit me like cold water, because up until then, I hadn't realized how deeply I had internalized the idea that love had to be earned, that I had to make myself smaller to deserve kindness, that I had to sacrifice parts of my identity to feel included. But what if love isn't a reward? What if love is something you deserve simply because you exist? That thought was terrifying and liberating. I started journaling again, not to prove anything, just to listen to myself. I wrote down memories I hadn't looked at in years. The time I got grounded for correcting my dad in front of guests, the way my mom once said I was too intense after I got excited about a college acceptance. At first, the memories made me angry, but then they started making sense. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't broken. I had just been surviving in an emotional climate that was never safe for me to grow. And now I was out of it. For the first time, I could choose what to keep and what to let go of. I remember sitting in a cafe a week after graduation, watching a father and daughter at a nearby table. He was teasing her gently, and she was laughing with her whole body. There was no fear in her eyes, no tension in her shoulders. I wanted that. Not just from a parent, but from myself. I wanted to treat myself like someone who deserved tenderness, who didn't have to fight for basic care, who could rest without guilt, laugh without shrinking. I wanted to become the kind of adult that the little girl version of me would have run toward, arms wide open. That became my new compass. And slowly, things began to change. I stopped rehearsing imaginary conversations where my parents finally apologized. I stopped opening their texts expecting warmth and started reading them for what they were: data, not validation. And I began to protect my peace with the kind of fierceness I used to reserve for chasing their approval. One day, I went back and rewatched my graduation speech. This time, not with the ache of wondering if they'd ever say, "good job," but with the eyes of someone who knew exactly what it cost to get to that stage. And for the first time, I felt proud without pain attached. Not because they might see me, but because I saw myself. And that was enough. That would always be enough. After graduation, I didn't rush to tell my parents anything else. I didn't send them pictures. I didn't forward the emails from professors congratulating me. I didn't call to fill the silence they left. I just didn't. For the first time in my life, I chose not to chase. And the silence felt peaceful, not empty. It was the first act of rebellion I'd ever taken that didn't look like rebellion at all. No fireworks, no confrontation. Just a simple, radical decision. I would no longer offer myself to people who didn't value me. That included my family. Growing up, I thought resistance meant fighting back, speaking up, arguing until they understood. But now I realized, resistance can be strategic. It can look like pulling your energy inward, like choosing stillness over reaction, like protecting your space the way you used to protect your dreams. So that's what I did. I started with my phone. I turned off message previews. I muted my family thread. I archived old conversations where I'd twisted myself into emotional knots just to get crumbs of connection. Then I made another decision, one that felt small but monumental. I wasn't going home that summer. Not for Noah's housewarming, not for Father's Day, not even for my mom's birthday. Instead, I stayed in Boston. I got a cheap sublet near the river and interned with a nonprofit legal clinic that helped women escape coercive family situations. Every day I sat across from girls not much younger than me, some fleeing abusive marriages, some fighting for custody, some just trying to breathe on their own terms. I listened, I learned, I helped where I could, and in doing so, I began healing parts of myself. Because here's the truth: helping others can be a mirror. Sometimes when you fight for someone else's safety, you realize how unsafe your own life has been. I started drawing invisible lines around my life, lines that said, "You don't get to ask personal questions if you've never offered emotional safety. You don't get to call me too sensitive when I set a boundary. You don't get access just because we share blood." It wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. One afternoon during that summer, I got a call from my mom. I let it go to voicemail. She left a long, meandering message. "Hi, sweetheart, haven't heard from you. Just checking in. Your father was wondering if you'd be coming home for the 4th. Noah wants to show you his new car. We all miss you." I listened to it once, then I deleted it. Because it was a message written in code. Checking in meant, "Why are you pulling away?" Your father was wondering meant, "We noticed the shift." "We all miss you" meant, "We're uncomfortable with your silence." But not once did she say, "We're sorry." Or, "We watched your speech and realized how badly we let you down." And I wasn't going to decode anymore. I wasn't going to make excuses for people who had no interest in understanding me. This was my new strategy. No more explaining my worth. No more arguing with people committed to misunderstanding me. No more extending olive branches to a forest fire. Instead, I focused on building a world where I didn't need to prove anything to be accepted. Natalie, my best friend, helped me move into my new apartment. Professor Chen helped me prep for my bar exam interviews, and I began building a support system that didn't rely on history, but on choice. That was the quiet revolution I needed. Not slamming doors, but locking them gently behind me. Not burning bridges, but letting the water rise and watching which ones sink. Not declaring war, but ending the performance. For the first time in my life, I stopped asking my family to love me correctly, and started loving myself precisely. And in that space, something bloomed that had never been allowed to grow before. Peace without permission. It happened 2 months after graduation. I hadn't planned it. There wasn't some dramatic buildup or big decision. Just a simple text from my mom one Friday evening that said, "Call us this weekend. It's been long enough." That was it. No warmth, no curiosity. Just another veiled demand disguised as concern. And for once, I didn't avoid it. I called. The phone rang twice, then my mom picked up. I could hear the familiar rustle of her moving into the kitchen to get some privacy. She always did that when she thought things might get emotional, but never to listen, only to control the narrative. Her voice was syrupy at first. "Ayla! Sweetheart, I was just talking about you. We miss you. Are you okay?" I paused. Then I said, "I'm fine. Are you?" She hesitated. That's when my dad must have come into the room, because I heard his voice in the background. Ask her what that email was about. There it was. They'd seen the video. They'd watched me give my speech to a cheering crowd, watched me thank people who weren't them, watched me say, clear as day, "Sometimes the greatest gift is realizing whose absence was the lesson." And suddenly, they had questions. My mom handed the phone to my dad. His voice was flat. "So, what was that supposed to be, Ayla? A performance? Some kind of message?" And just like that, I felt it again. That old pressure in my chest. The part of me that wanted to smooth things over. The daughter who wanted to explain herself, to be understood. But I didn't let her speak. Instead, I said this. "It wasn't a message. It was my life. You just weren't in it." Silence. Then he scoffed. "We've always supported you. We just don't coddle you like some families do." That's when the shaking started. Not my voice, but my hands. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. Because this was it. This was the moment I had never thought I'd get. The moment to say everything I'd swallowed for 28 years. So I said it. Calm. Director. Unapologetic. "You didn't support me. You tolerated me. There's a difference. You showed up for Noah when he failed. You celebrated him when he did the bare minimum. I became valedictorian of a top law school, and you couldn't be bothered to drive out. That's not tough love. That's erasure." My mom tried to jump in, soft and shaky. "Honey, we just didn't know it meant that much." I cut her off, for the first time in my life. "You didn't ask if it meant that much, because if you did, you'd have to admit that you've been absent my entire life." Silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was clean. I kept going. "This isn't about graduation. This is about a pattern, a lifetime of being ignored, dismissed, minimized, and made to feel like loving me was an inconvenience. You don't get to be confused about my distance. I've been trying to tell you for years, and you just didn't want to hear it. So here's me saying it clearly. I'm done explaining myself to people who refuse to see me." I expected yelling, denial, a lecture. Instead, my dad said, bitter and cold, "If you're trying to punish us, congratulations. You've made your point." And I smiled, because that response confirmed everything I needed to know. They still thought this was about revenge. They still thought I wanted something from them. They didn't understand that this wasn't about punishment. This was about freedom. "I'm not trying to punish you," I said softly. "I'm just finally living without your permission." Then I hung up. No scream, no insult, no final slam of the door. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like safety. The kind of quiet that feels like truth. I put my phone down, walked to the mirror, and looked at myself. I didn't look like someone who had burned a bridge. I looked like someone who had finally crossed one. The auditorium was full. Not just with people, but with energy. Palpable, buzzing, expectant. My name was printed in the program under Valedictorian speaker. My robe was pressed. My speech was folded neatly in my hand. But there was no one in the audience holding up a sign with my name. No parents craning to take photos. No warm family group waiting with flowers. That space was empty. But I wasn't. Because the power of that moment, my moment, had nothing to do with who wasn't there. It had everything to do with who I had become despite it. I stood behind the curtain, clutching the microphone, when a staff member leaned in and whispered, "You ready, Ayla?" I nodded. Not just because I'd rehearsed the speech 100 times, but because I was finally ready in a way I hadn't been for years. Ready to stop performing. Ready to speak my truth. Fully. Ready to take up the space I had been shrinking out of my entire life. As I stepped onto the stage, the applause started. It wasn't deafening. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. And for once, I didn't imagine my parents in the audience. I didn't look for their faces in the crowd. I looked for my best friend Natalie, sitting in the third row, tears already in her eyes. I looked for Professor Chen, standing in the back, nodding slowly like she already knew what I was about to say. I looked for me, the girl who used to cry over report cards that no one pinned to the fridge, the girl who once believed that love was a reward for perfection. And then I spoke. I started with gratitude. To the professors who challenged me, the classmates who supported me, the mentors who believed in me, thank you. You showed me what it means to be truly seen. I felt the weight of every word. Then I paused, took a breath, looked out into the sea of faces, some smiling, some emotional, all listening. And I said, there are people who were supposed to be here today, but they're not. And for a long time, that used to devastate me. I used to think success meant proving them wrong. That if I just achieved enough, worked hard enough, became impressive enough, they'd show up. They'd love me the way I needed. Another pause. But here's what I've learned. Some people won't love you until you stop needing them to. And some people, no matter what you do, will never clap for you, because your existence alone challenges the version of you they tried to control. It was quiet in the room. Not awkward. Electric. People were holding their breath. And I continued. So today isn't just about a degree. It's about reclaiming the little girl I used to be, the one who whispered, "Look at me," and finally answering, "I see you. I'm proud of you. You did it." That was the line that stayed with people. That was the line that later got quoted by the school's Instagram page, reposted by alumni, even referenced in a National Women in Law newsletter. But I didn't write it for them. I wrote it for me. Because standing on that stage, delivering that speech with my voice steady and my heart wide open, was the symbolic victory I'd waited a lifetime for. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their approval. I had something better. Proof. Proof that I didn't need a family cheering from the sidelines to cross the finish line. Proof that I could become the woman I needed as a child. Proof that healing doesn't come from changing the past. It comes from refusing to let it control your future. And later that night, when I sat alone in my apartment, I watched the video of my speech. I didn't cry. I didn't wish anyone else had been there. I just smiled and emailed it to my parents with a subject line that said everything I couldn't say out loud. For when you're not too busy. I used to think support had to come from people who shared your last name, that it had to be your mom, your dad, your brother, people bound to you by blood. But I've learned something truer, something gentler. Sometimes family finds you, and it looks nothing like you expected. The morning after graduation, I woke up to a knock on my apartment door. I hadn't planned anything, hadn't invited anyone over. But there stood Natalie, holding a tray with iced coffee and a bag of bagels from the little shop near our law school. She wasn't smiling, not the wide kind. She was just looking at me the way you do when you see someone, not the version they present, but the one they hide. She said, "I figured you might not feel like being alone today." That was it. No big speech, no forced celebration, just showing up. And that, I realized, was what real love looks like. Later that afternoon, I met Professor Chen for lunch. She was the one who had pulled me aside during my second year and said, "You don't have to shrink to fit into this profession." She had seen something in me long before I did. As we sat in the quiet corner of a Thai restaurant, she raised a glass of sparkling water and said, "Your speech. It was brave. But more than that, it was free." I blinked, unsure what she meant. She leaned forward. You weren't trying to prove anything. That's how I knew you've done the real work." That moment stuck with me, because she was right. I wasn't trying to get a reaction anymore. I was just telling the truth. And telling the truth is what drew the right people in. I started getting emails from classmates I barely knew, women who had grown up in similar homes, who wrote things like, "Your speech made me feel less alone. I watched it 3 times. Thank you for saying what I've never been able to." Even an old high school acquaintance reached out. She had seen the clip through mutual friends. Her message read, "I remember when we were kids, and you always looked so put together. I didn't know what you were carrying. I wish I had." The more people I heard from, the more I realized, you don't need a crowd. You just need the right few. People who don't need you to tone it down. People who don't feel threatened by your healing. People who show up, not just to celebrate, but to witness your pain without flinching. Even Uncle Ray's widow, Aunt Teresa, wrote me after seeing the video. She mailed me a small box. Inside was a worn leather briefcase and a handwritten note. "This was Ray's. He told me once that you were going to change the world, and all your father would ever do is wonder why he wasn't part of it. I think he'd want you to have this." I sat there, holding that briefcase like it was a living thing, like it carried every late-night conversation I'd never gotten to have with the only adult who had ever really believed in me. And I cried. But not out of grief, out of recognition. I wasn't alone anymore, not emotionally, not spiritually, not in the version of my life I was building from the ground up. People talk about cutting off toxic family like it's the end of a story, but it's not. It's just the beginning. The space where new love has room to grow, where you realize that found family, chosen allies, mentors, and friends can love you more fully than people who've known you since birth. Because they choose to. They don't love you out of habit. They don't love a version of you that never existed. They love the whole, real, complicated you, and they show it. Not with speeches, but with coffee on your doorstep, with a briefcase in the mail, with a seat saved in the 3rd row. And when you start accepting love like that, not begging for it, not proving you're worthy of it, but simply receiving it, you realize something powerful. You were never unlovable. You were just surrounded by people who didn't know how to love you. And now you're not. I didn't set out to expose anyone. This wasn't about revenge or public humiliation. It was about truth. And the way truth, once spoken aloud, refuses to stay hidden. After the speech went up on the school's website, it didn't take long for people to start noticing. The university had posted the video to their alumni page, and one of my classmates tagged me in it with the caption, "Still thinking about Ayla Monroe's speech. This is what courage sounds like." It started with a few reposts. Then a blog picked it up. Then someone on Twitter quoted the line, "Some people won't love you until you stop needing them to." By the end of the week, it had reached corners of the internet I hadn't expected. Women's leadership groups, estranged daughters forums, even a parenting subreddit asking, "How do we make sure we never make our kids feel this way?" It didn't go viral. It went deep, and with it came attention I hadn't anticipated, from people inside my own extended family. My cousin Jenna, who I hadn't spoken to in years, sent me a DM. My cousin Jenna, who I hadn't spoken to in years, sent me a DM. "I always wondered why you were so quiet at family gatherings. Now I get it." A few days later, I got an email from my Aunt Carol, my dad's sister. "I don't want to cross any lines, Ayla, but I just want to say, I've seen the way your parents treat you. I should have spoken up years ago. I'm sorry I didn't." That message hit harder than I expected. Because she knew. They all knew. Or at least felt something was wrong. But no one said a word. Not when I was a kid. Not when I graduated high school alone. Not when I showed up to holidays more like a polite guest than a daughter. Now, suddenly, the silence was breaking. Aunt Carol told me that when she mentioned the speech to my dad, he brushed it off. "Ayla's just being dramatic. She's always been like that." That sentence stuck with me. Not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed everything I'd ever feared. He had rewritten the story. In his version, I wasn't the kid who begged to be seen. I was the one who always made things difficult. I wasn't the daughter who rose above emotional starvation. I was the one who made a fuss. He had minimized me so thoroughly in private that by the time I found the courage to speak my truth publicly, he could hide behind the same old line, "She's overreacting." But this time, it didn't work, because I had receipts. My words weren't whispered to a therapist or buried in a journal. They were spoken into a microphone, in front of hundreds of people, backed by years of silent proof. And the people listening weren't strangers. They were classmates, professors, mentors, relatives, people who had watched me rise with quiet dignity and now finally saw why I had to fight so hard to get there. I didn't need to defend myself. He had already exposed himself, with every absence, every denial, every silence. And people noticed. I heard from another cousin a week later, Darren, from my mom's side. "I talked to your mom last week. She said you've changed. I told her maybe she should ask why." That's when I knew the story was no longer just mine. It was theirs too. The ones who stood by, the ones who looked away, the ones who now had to confront what they ignored. And that wasn't my burden anymore. I wasn't going to police their reactions or manage their discomfort. I told the truth. They could do what they wanted with it. Because for so long, I thought my silence was protecting them. But now I understood. My silence wasn't kindness. It was complicity. And breaking that silence didn't make me cruel. It made me free. My parents didn't lose me. They let me go. And for the first time, the people around them were starting to see that too. There's this idea that every story needs closure, that at some point, the people who hurt you will realize what they did, say they're sorry, and beg to be let back in. But real life isn't a movie. Sometimes there is no apology, no reconciliation, no tearful moment of redemption. And strangely enough, I didn't need it anymore. Because I had something better. Clarity. Clarity that I had done everything I could. That I had loved as hard as I knew how. That I had reached for people who never reached back. And not because I was unworthy, but because they were unwilling. That kind of clarity doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, in quiet, sacred moments. Like when you wake up and realize you haven't checked your phone for their texts. Or when something amazing happens, and your first thought isn't to call them, but to sit in it by yourself and feel proud anyway. Or when someone says, "You're so grounded," and you smile, not because you agree, but because you remember a time when you didn't even know who you were without their approval. I used to think forgiveness meant letting my parents back into my life. Now I know forgiveness can simply mean, I release the hold you had on me. Not because what you did was okay, but because I refused to carry it any further. I no longer needed to hear them say, "We were wrong," because I had already stopped believing they were right. The girl I used to be, the one who sat in her room writing college essays in silence while her brother watched TV with my dad, she deserved more. And now, she had it. Not because the people around her changed, but because she did. That's what healing really is. Not a clean slate, but a firm boundary. Not pretending the past didn't hurt, but refusing to let it define who you become. It's saying, I can love people from a distance. I can honor my past without living in it. I can create a life that feels good, even if the people who made me can't be part of it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to fix anyone. Not my father's coldness. Not my mother's silence. Not my family's discomfort with who I really am. That was never my job. My job is to protect my peace, to honor my truth, to be the kind of woman I needed growing up. And that's who I'm becoming. I don't want revenge. I don't need them to feel guilty. I just want freedom. The kind that comes from letting go, not because you've given up, but because you've finally accepted the truth. Some people will only ever love you if you stay small. And I refuse to shrink. Not for a seat at the table, not for tradition. Not even for the fantasy of what family is supposed to look like. Because family isn't supposed to hurt you and then ask you to pretend it didn't happen. It's not supposed to make you feel like a guest in your own story. It's supposed to be a place where you are loved as you are, not as you perform. And if that place doesn't exist, you build it. You become it. You light the fire, open the door, and make sure the next generation never has to wonder if they are enough. That's what I'm doing now. Not moving on, but moving forward. With clarity, with peace, and with no more empty seats saved for people who never intended to show up. Healing is not a final destination. It's not a single moment of triumph where you suddenly arrive at a perfect version of yourself and the past no longer stings. It's a process, a messy, beautiful, layered process of choosing yourself over and over again, even when it hurts. And that's what I've been doing. Since that graduation day, my life hasn't become perfect, but it's become mine. And that means everything. After I passed the bar exam, I turned down the shiny firm job with the 6-figure salary and glass office. People thought I was crazy, but I didn't go through everything I went through just to sit at a table where I couldn't breathe. So I accepted a position at a non-profit legal organization focused on advocating for girls and women navigating emotionally abusive family systems, people like I used to be. Our clients range from teenage girls seeking guardianship emancipation to women trying to establish legal independence from controlling parents or spouses. Some days are heavy, some days are slow, but every day I know why I'm there. Because I've lived it. Because I speak the language of silence and shame and survival. Because when a scared 17-year-old girl says, "My parents are kind of like yours," I can look her in the eyes and say, "You are not the problem. You're the proof that things can be different." And it's not just about work. It's the life I've built around it. Natalie and I are still inseparable. She's more than a friend. She's family. The kind you find, the kind you choose, the kind who shows up without having to be asked. We share a place now. A small apartment with hardwood floors and the kind of mismatched furniture that comes from moving too often and starting over too many times. But it's filled with laughter, safety, music, peace. On weekends, we host found family dinners, open-door nights where friends, neighbors, even clients sometimes come by to eat, rest, and breathe. We don't just feed people, we see them. And slowly, I've begun to see myself differently too. I no longer define myself by who didn't love me. I define myself by who I've become in spite of that. I volunteer at a local mentorship program for first-generation college girls. I lead workshops on self-advocacy and personal boundaries. I teach them not just about legal systems, but emotional ones. How to spot manipulation. How to name gaslighting. How to trust their intuition even when the world tells them they're being too much. And somewhere along the way, the little girl inside me, the one who used to hide her awards in drawers because no one cared, has started stepping out of the shadows. I framed my diploma. I printed my speech and keep a copy on my desk. I bought myself flowers on my birthday and didn't feel embarrassed when I posted about it. These might sound like small things, but they're not. They're acts of reclamation. Because for so long, I lived my life like I was just trying to escape. Now I live it like I'm trying to build. Build peace. Build purpose. Build something I can be proud of, whether anyone's watching or not. And most importantly, I've built a new internal compass. One that no longer points toward people who mistreat me and calls it home. I no longer long for a family that doesn't see me. I create family every single day. In my work, my friendships, my mentorships, and in the quiet, sacred relationship I've begun developing with myself. They didn't come to my graduation. They didn't clap. But I did, and I still do. Because I'm not a daughter waiting at the window anymore. I'm a woman building a life with windows of her own, wide open, sunlight pouring in, no need to be small to fit inside. About 6 months after my graduation, I got an email from my mother. Subject line: "I watched your speech." No emojis, no exclamation marks, just those 4 quiet words. I hesitated before opening it. My heart didn't race like it used to. I wasn't desperate or hopeful. I was calm, but cautious. The email was short. My mom never was great with words. "I watched your speech. I didn't realize how much we'd hurt you. I thought we were just giving you space. I'd like to talk, if you're open to it. That was it. No real apology, no accountability for specific moments. But it was more than she'd ever offered before. For days, I didn't respond. I talked it through with Natalie. I took it to therapy. I wrote a response in my journal a dozen times, trying to figure out what felt like truth, not performance. And what I realized was this. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. But I wasn't going to open the door without locks either. So I wrote back. I'm open to a conversation, but I need you to understand. It can't be the kind we used to have. I'm not coming home. I'm not pretending everything's fine. And I won't explain my feelings in a way that makes them easier for you to hear. If you're open to a real, honest conversation, one where you listen without defending, then yes, we can talk. She replied the next day. Okay, I'll try. So we set up a Zoom call, and I prepared myself, not for a tearful reunion, but for what it actually was. A test. When the screen loaded, my mom looked smaller. Not physically, but energetically. She had her hair tied back, no makeup. She looked tired, but maybe for the first time she looked willing. She said my name softly. Hi, Ayla. I nodded. Hi, Mom. Then came the silence, the space where 100 things could be said. She filled it slowly. I didn't realize how far away you'd gotten from us. I didn't understand what it felt like, growing up with us. I didn't want to see it. I didn't interrupt. I just let her speak. She talked about how she always assumed I was the strong one, that Noah needed more support, that she thought I didn't mind being overlooked. I corrected her, gently but firmly. I didn't mind being overlooked, Mom. I was surviving it. And then I asked her something I had never dared to ask before. When I sent you that graduation invitation, did you even consider coming? Her eyes welled up. She didn't dodge. We should have. I should have. I told your father we'd regret it. He said it wasn't a big deal. There it was. The closest I would get to accountability. And you know what? It was enough. Not for full healing, but for beginning something. I didn't need her to be perfect. I just needed her to be real. Toward the end of the call, she said, Your speech. I felt like I lost you. And I told her the truth. You didn't lose me. I chose to leave, because staying meant abandoning myself. She nodded. Quietly, slowly. I get it now. That was the moment I knew we might find some middle ground. Not a full reconciliation, not trust overnight, but a cautious, conditional bridge built from honesty, not obligation. Since then, we've emailed a few times. She sends updates. Sometimes they're awkward. Sometimes they're kind. She hasn't asked me to come home. I haven't offered. But the conversation stays open. And that, for now, is enough. I've set boundaries. I've made it clear. If you raise your voice, the call ends. If you rewrite the past, I correct you once. If you guilt me, I walk away. And she's respected those rules so far. I don't know if she'll ever become the mother I needed, but I do know this. I am no longer the daughter who bends herself into silence for the sake of keeping peace. So if we ever build something real, it'll be on my terms. It'll be earned. It'll be safe. And if not, that's okay too. Because reconciliation isn't the goal. Self-respect is. Some stories end with reconciliation. Some end with total disconnection. Mine ends here, with something quieter, but just as powerful. Ownership. I own what happened. I own how I survived it. And I own the life I've built in spite of it. There's no big final scene, no perfectly tied ribbon, just a woman sitting in her own apartment, sipping tea on a quiet Sunday morning, wrapped in the kind of peace she used to think only existed in other people's homes. Sometimes I still get sad. Grief doesn't vanish. It softens. It stretches out. It changes shape. It visits on birthdays, holidays, in the spaces where other people talk about their parents without flinching. But it no longer controls me. It doesn't dictate my decisions. It doesn't cloud my joy. It doesn't make me feel unworthy of love that shows up. Because I've redefined love. It's not grand gestures. It's not forced loyalty. It's not being guilted into silence. It's quiet, consistent care. It's being believed without having to explain. It's someone knocking on your door just to say, "You don't have to do this alone." And now, I give that love to myself. I wake up in a space I made, filled with things that feel like me. Books stacked high, soft lights, the framed graduation photo I used to be afraid to display. I have conversations with women every day who are just beginning to question the families they came from. I see their pain, their confusion, their hope, and I tell them, you don't have to wait for permission to become who you were meant to be. That's what this story has always been about. Not revenge, not proving anyone wrong. Becoming right with yourself. I still remember the exact moment during my speech when everything clicked. I looked out over that audience, hundreds of faces I didn't know well, but who were fully present, and said, "You don't have to prove your worth to anyone who's decided not to see it." And I felt it, not just in my voice, but in my body. Like something was breaking free, something ancestral, something final. I wasn't just speaking to them. I was speaking to the girl I used to be. The one who used to sit on the stairs during Christmas while everyone laughed in the kitchen without her. The one who learned to swallow disappointment like it was air. The one who stopped asking to be chosen. And I whispered to her as I walked off that stage, "They didn't come, but you did. You made it." And that was all the closure I ever needed. So, if you're watching this, maybe you're someone who's been quietly carrying the weight of being the unseen one. Maybe you've been waiting for someone to finally say, "I believe you." What happened wasn't okay, and you don't need to explain anymore. Let me be that person for you. You are not difficult. You are not broken. You are not too much. You're just tired of squeezing yourself into a shape that makes other people comfortable. So stop shrinking. Take up space. Tell the truth, even when your voice shakes. And if your family never shows up, show up for yourself anyway. Because that's where the power is. Not in convincing others to love you right, but in loving yourself so fully, so defiantly, that their absence no longer echoes. Today I live without waiting, without begging, without pretending. And that, more than any speech, any diploma, or any email I've ever sent, is my real graduation. Not from school, but from silence, from survival, from smallness. So I'll leave you with this. What would your life look like if you stopped waiting for permission to take up space? And if that question hit something deep inside you, you're not alone. Drop your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to know they're not the only one. And maybe that someone is you.